I've seen people get wealthy to an extent that feels completely unnecessary. I mean, why does Elon Musk have over $100 billion? That should not happen. That should be impossible. It should be literally impossible for someone to have that much money.
What if he's created that much value?
He's creating, but that's my point, is that value is not reaching people. It's reaching him and a set of shareholders or investors. I just think that's where I mean, like, the wealth has gotten, out, to my view, has gotten way out of whack. I mean, why?
What's enough money? Do the Obamas have too much money?
We know of new methods of attack. The Trojan horse, the fifth column.
Greetings and welcome back to another exciting installment of the Fifth Column podcast. This is your weekly rhetorical assault on the news cycle, the people that make it, occasionally ourselves. I'm Kmele Foster. Delighted to be here. I'm talking pretty fast. I'm going to ratchet it down about 20%. Matt Welch is here. Michael Moynihan is here.
How's it going?
Greetings.
Also going to talk fast today. I'm just warning you right now. I had the first cup of coffee in 4 months.
The best part of waking up.
It's like fucking cocaine. It's
Mormon.
incredible.
Seriously?
Yeah, I don't want to die from a heart attack, so I'm trying to keep things.
So
well, I should introduce our guest.
Yes.
Ben Rhodes is here on publication day for his new
Publication
book.
Day.
yeah, we
right.
got you on publication day.
Yeah,
That's
an honor.
crazy.
That's big, guys.
That means we
Yeah.
have to talk about
That's
the
an honor
book,
for
though.
you.
I know.
do have to
It's
talk
my
about
way
it.
of forcing the conversation.
I want to talk about the book. I've read the book. I want to talk about it. But you are former national security advisor for the Obama administration, a speechwriter, a man of many talents,
Podcaster extraordinaire.
and a podcaster extraordinaire. Although
Pod
we
Save the
decided
world.
we don't even call it podcasts anymore. Although
we
it
don't.
can still be called Pod Save, whatever you like.
Yes.
We don't begrudge you that
content.
But there's lots of foreign policy and national security oriented stuff going on. So I
Yes, there
suspect
is.
you
Yes,
can
there
help
is.
us
We
disentangle.
can
some
unpack
of
We won
this.
in Iran, I think. Did we win?
This is what I've been
We've been
told.
on the precipice.
Okay,
of
right.
Victory.
victory
The deal
for
is
some
almost-
time. Yeah.
We've almost get back to the JCPOA. How long did it take me to mention JCPOA?
You said beforehand,
Yeah,
like, let's not
don't
bring it
talk
up.
Let's not go like
Once
we
90
litigate
seconds.
that and then
I mean,
I
it's
bring it
having a
up.
renaissance.
Yeah, it's having a renaissance. It's like, let's
having
get
a
back
moment.
to that.
I thought we were just going to talk about basketball, though. For the past 5 or 10 minutes, we've been sitting here talking about the New York Knicks and
Sweep.
NBA.
Yeah. And they won by 98 points, too. That was like a Washington Generals game last night.
The East is not great.
But being a Knicks fan is supposed to be painful. Like, even the wins are supposed to be agonizing.
Yeah.
And that's what's so strange about this. It's like, why does this feel so easy and good?
You're a massive Knicks fan?
I am.
You grew up in Manhattan?
I grew up in Manhattan. We had tickets in the 90s. And again, like, when those teams won, it was usually like 88 to 87. And like Oakley had to get into like 2 fights, and like Ewing had to like throw his body around, get fouls, and you eked it out. So the idea of like blowing through the East was never anything I considered seeing.
Who was your guy? Was it Starks?
So, okay, my OG was Gerald Wilkins, dating myself now.
Wow. Okay.
And so then I was a Starks guy because I liked the guards. I was at the game for the dunk when he went over Jordan with the left hand.
That was the anniversary yesterday, right?
It was.
It was.
And my jersey was Mason and Anthony Mason. Those are my 2 guys, Starks and Mason. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Knicks carving up either, I guess they were going to be facing either Philadelphia with Embiid, who was hobbled,
On one leg, yeah.
or the Cavs.
Celtics. Well, the
who
Celtics
were
would have
absolutely
been
terrible.
I was a little
Celtics
afraid of
similarly
them. Yeah,
hobbled.
yeah.
So there's just a lot of beleaguered teams in the East, and the
you're
Knicks
just
are
running
carving
them
them
down,
out.
aren't you?
I'm just saying. But it is
Reality
interesting if
check,
they
yeah.
are going to have a good chance, at least at the moment. OKC similarly has one of their superstars hobbled right now and is having a very difficult time with the Spurs. And watching Wemby play is so fucking exciting.
Yeah.
I mean,
My
he's absolutely
11-year-old, who's never been a fan of any sport, has just totally caught NBA fever.
Yeah,
over
my
the
kids
last
too.
5
Wemby
days.
because they're
it
with
Wemby?
French?
Wemby, the French.
the French thing a
She's
connection?
going to write him a bilingual MASH note.
Okay.
Calling him Monsieur Wemby. She's
Yeah,
got
yeah.
it like all worked out, and telling him that she's going to start playing because of him. She really thinks that's going to be her ticket to marrying him. I think.
Okay.
Oh,
I don't
boy.
think,
Yeah, it's probably
you
not
should
gonna
discourage that. I don't know why. Do I have to parent for you in the
Don't
show?
want
too?
to be
This is insane.
a Mark Harmon sister situation.
Yeah. Oh, God, that was
A little
that
height
was-
differential.
Yeah.
Too,
Good
actually.
Lord.
We were talking before you got here, Ben, and someone threw out a question. I don't remember who it was, but said maybe a great place to start with, Ben, is you've got the current political landscape in front of you.
You are the president
Yes.
now.
You are the president.
What do you?
We are here with Iran now, a subject of which you have some familiarity and relevant experience with. What do you do as president right now? Right now, today.
With Iran specifically,
Yes.
look, I think what you have to do is just accept the reality that they're not going to capitulate to your demands, and continuing this war is going to tank the entire global economy. And so what you do is you take a deal where they're going to get a significant amount of revenue. You give them sanctions relief. You let them out from under those sanctions in exchange for them opening the Strait of Hormuz, shipping their highly enriched uranium, that's their stockpiled nuclear material, out of the country, and submitting to inspections of all their nuclear facilities with some restrictions on what they can do there, and you call it a day. That sounds like the Iran nuclear deal I worked on, because that's the best you're going to get from them.
Do you think you can get that right now? I mean, they seem to be in the catbird seat at the moment, that they can kind of, Trump, they don't have to respond to a population, right? And voters.
Yes.
Trump is obviously reacting like the midterms are coming up, the economy's terrible, gas prices are high, and he can say uncle pretty quickly because of his domestic political concerns, something they don't have to worry about. Do you think he can even get that?
He can get it. Here's what I think is the hang up. The Iranians will want the money on the front end of the deal.
Yeah.
And
that appears to be the hang up right now.
Yes. And it feels like Trump is trying to sequence this thing to push that as far back as possible so that when it happens, people's attentions have shifted. But because they're sitting in the catbird seat, because they know they have the leverage, because they don't give a shit about what happens to their people, they can withstand pain. And so you got to front load that sanctions relief to open up that strait and potentially unlock that nuclear deal. But look, my argument would be in this, here's where I part company from some other people too. I don't think the sanctions accomplish anything. They've had a nuclear program under sanctions. Mm-hmm. They've done all the bad things that we don't like with these maximum pressure, total sanctions. Frankly, the worst people in Iran, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps that runs the show there now, they live fine under sanctions because they deal in black market economics, right? It's the Iranians, the normal people that get hurt. So I actually don't think it's a big concession that you're essentially legitimizing them. You're saying, okay, here you get a bunch of revenue, you can rebuild. But I don't know what we're getting out of these anyway. And so I actually, even if I was president, not Trump, I don't have a problem in saying you got to give something to get something in a deal. And what we got to give is we built up these sanctions for a reason. We, to get them to at least roll back their nuclear program. So that's what I do.
You've talked about sanctions quite a bit. You talked about sanctions recently, but vis-a-vis Cuba, you were instrumental in the Obama administration's opening to Cuba. You write about it in your first book, going to baseball games and to Raul Castro's
spent a bunch of time with that guy.
Drank
a lot of Havana Club rum with Raul Castro. Yeah.
So, I've heard you just be very critical of sanctions in general, right? Is that a fair characterization?
Here's how I'd sum it up. The most heavily sanctioned countries by the United States are Iran, Cuba, Russia, North Korea, Russia.
Yeah.
Have they worked? I actually fundamentally don't think they work.
So what do you do in these? Because this is what I was trying to get out of your 2021 book and a lot of the interviews you've done is there seems to be a retreat from the world, kind of come back home, not an isolationist thing, but what are America's levers and mechanisms over bad actors, if not sanctions, if not military power? What do you do?
Yeah,
and I know that's different from case-to-case scenario.
It is different because a Cuba is a simple one to me, right? Which is I'd actually lift everything, and I believe that if I believe that if Cuba was suddenly flooded with American tourists and American investment, the idea that the Communist Party could control that in an island state, they
were flooded with Canadian investment, European tourists, Canadian tourists,
and
South
that
American
opening
tourists.
brought a lot of remittances and stuff to Cubans.
But not entirely, because actually they couldn't really have significant European investment because they couldn't do transactions in the dollar, because we basically cut them off from the dollar. So it was a spigot. It wasn't a flood. And I actually think if you flooded the place with investment, if you flooded the place with travelers, that then they would lose control. It was a controlled enough trickle of travel and tourism and investment that the Communist Party could control it all.
But companies also have to deal directly with the Cuban government. Everything has to go through the regime, go through the military apparatus. So it's not a great investment if you're a European company, a Canadian country, a company. I mean, a lot of that is the internal problems of the Cuban dictatorship, right?
It is. But what we did is in the Obama years, they started to create a private sector. And so most of the tourism-related industry, taxis, I mean, this is why libertarians were actually supportive of our policy. The taxis, small businesses, restaurants, like people selling stuff in stores,
art,
were accepted from the Cuban Communist Party government control. And so all the money was flowing there. We were trying to actually direct the money directly to Cubans and not the Communist Party controlled economy. And actually, if you start to create enough pull in that direction, they also then started to you have to give them incentives to reform their economy and open things up, right? That's where the money's going. So look, do I think that
the repression got worse, didn't it? I mean, arrest.
No.
I mean, there's a counter narrative to the Obama opening, and I am very libertarian on this. I don't think that cutting Cuba off or Americans from traveling there, it doesn't make any sense. It's wrong and it has failed.
Yeah.
But the repression, the numbers of people who were arrested kept climbing after that to a point where, people that were opposed to your policy saying, well, it is opening and they're trying to make sure that people don't get any ideas about democracy and freedom.
It didn't climb. I mean, we tried it for 2 years, right? So we announced the opening in the end of 2014. It did not start climbing until after Trump kind of partially rolled it back. And look, I'll be honest, do I think that they'll come out and stop repressing people? No. But that's been a constant in Cuba. And I'd rather bet on trying something different, open it up, let people travel there, let people invest there, than just continuing this constant pressure cycle that we've been in that, allows them to repress. It's not like that's work. The funny thing is people say, we tried the Obama way for 2 years and it didn't work. Well, we tried the other way for 60 years and it didn't work. I have confidence that if you open things up, it'd be more likely to bring about an incentivized change. Now, I actually think it's harder. There's a place for sanctions if they're focused on an outcome, right? So the Iran nuclear deal, I believe that the sanctions that we put in place had a specific purpose. It was not to change every Iranian behavior. It was to change this one thing, their nuclear program. And I think where you get into trouble is we sanction countries and then we find new reasons to keep them in place. So it's like when we did the nuclear deal, people said, well, what about their ballistic missile program? Or what about their support for this or that proxy group? I think the way you use sanctions is for a very targeted and specific purpose, not just sanctioning the whole country and saying, until you stop doing all these things that we don't like, you're going to be in jail, and sanctions jail. And by the way, this is in our interest also because the overuse of sanctions is now leading China to make some inroads against the dollar being the world's reserve currency, because they're basically saying, do you want to be hostage to American sanctions? Do transactions in the RMB, right, on oil trades, for instance. So I think there's a lot of downstream costs from sanctions too. I think to punish...
But there are downstream costs from opening up too. I mean, obviously giving the Iranian regime lots of cash, right? And whether that's because we didn't, deliver something that Shah ordered in 1977 or not, is lots of cash coming to that country does help the Iranians fund the axis of resistance and a lot of bad actors in the region, right? I mean, so there are downstream negative costs of providing a lot of cash to the Iranian regime, right?
Yeah, and I acknowledge that. I guess what I would say is we have seen, we can evaluate, okay, what happens when these sanctions are in place. They find the money to continue to do those things in the same way that Putin found the money to continue the war in Ukraine, in the same way that Kim Jong-un found money to continue to build a nuclear program. I believe that the people that get disempowered by these kinds of embargo-like sanctions are the Iranian middle class, are the people that would want a different kind of government. And so I frankly believe that the risk of some more money flowing into government coffers is worth the benefit kind of creating alternative power structures in a society where you can build up a middle class that wants to integrate more with the global economy, with the United States, with Europe, with other countries, with the Arab states. And so, yeah, you don't, I would not, I'd be lying to sitting here saying you eliminate risk. But I actually think that what I've learned, and I've changed my view on this over time, is that those kinds of regimes, if they have, $100, they will find enough money that they need to fund the bad stuff. If you cut it to 10, they'll spend all $10 on the bad stuff, And what we haven't seen, and this I think is objectively true, sanctions have never changed a regime. So the idea that they're going to kind of collapse, we're going to bring them to their knees, is not demonstrated.
Do you think that it had some effect in South Africa? That's usually the sanctions positive case.
Yeah, I think it did. So that's a good example. I think there it was, and so this gets to the other pieces of leverage, though. I think that whether it's a sanctions policy or any policy that's designed to isolate another government, it is going to have the most profound impact if you do it in concert with a lot of other countries. And so if it was just the United States sanctioning the apartheid South African government, I actually don't think it would have had that effect. But basically what happened is just about everybody was like, you know what, we're done with these guys. We're going to start boycotting them. We're going to start sanctioning them. And so to have a truly transformative impact, you kind of need a global coalition to go along with what you're doing, which we have not had on Iran and North Korea.
We did have on Libya, though, didn't we? Had a bigger coalition, particularly the French and NATO involved. Yeah, and I know that this is your time in the White House, and you've been very critical of that too. So I mean, coalitions can still produce bad results, right?
Well, the interesting thing about Libya is the coalition for sanctions related to Gaddafi's nuclear program worked. Like Gaddafi got rid of his nuclear program. What we did wrong is...
You said that was the Iraq War, too.
What we did wrong in Libya is... And even our... We started bombing Libya to prevent Gaddafi from essentially massacring opposition-controlled areas.
In Benghazi.
And then we in Benghazi, which was a place before it was a scandal,
a political name. Yeah.
Then we went down the typical American slippery slope logic train to, well, we better just keep doing this until Gaddafi's out of power. And I think when you military, whatever coalition you have, and that was a big one, and it was a UN Security Council authorized action, military regime change doesn't have a track record of working. And our mistake, was certainly following military intervention all the way to regime change. There's an alternative history where we bomb them, he's pushed out of Benghazi, and then we stop, which actually, there's an argument that might have been useful to do to just save those people. But where I had to, again, be learned from experience, like I don't think military regime change works. And I challenge people to find, maybe you can find like Grenada or the very small places where it might work. But
do you look back at Yugoslav wars and say that worked-ish, or was that like a stepping stone to our more kind of easy use of interventionism afterwards?
I think it worked-ish, but I think people I was in government with some people that were older and part of those, and I think they overlearned lessons from that, because the difference with those interventions in Bosnia and Kosovo, which, by the way, didn't solve all those problems. Like Kosovo and Serbia are still kind of, antagonists. Trump somehow claims that's one of the 8 wars he's ended, even though it happened in the 90s. But it was in Europe, right? It was in the middle of Europe. Literally the middle of Europe. And so the ability to kind of absorb those places after they were broken, with the European Union all around it, and with the Europeans putting in resources and peacekeeping personnel, is just something that we didn't have in Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya. And so I think...
No. What did they find on the web?
I don't know which foreign government is listening to me.
Yeah.
That's very strange.
Black cube strikes again.
Well, yeah, we can talk about that. But I think that, and I remember saying this in meetings, like, guys, like the different context is it's on the European continent. And so you have all these institutions and all these resources to bring to bear. It's not as culturally distinct. Like we understand those places better than these other places. We have institutions that are ready to absorb a lot of the costs of this. And so I think that people did, and I did too. Like when I started out in foreign policy, turn of the century-ish, like post 9/11, this idea of humanitarian intervention, I think
responsibility to protect.
Responsibility to protect. I think that had a lot of origins in people feeling good. And by the way, like there are downstream consequences to those interventions too. It's part of what kind of radicalized Putin. I still think they were worth doing, but I do think we overlearned lessons.
So I'm trying to get where you are now, because I mean, you say lessons learned from kind of being on the ground and being inside the White House, and we've all changed our minds on lots of things. Where are you on this kind of stuff now when it comes to humanitarian intervention? I mean, I don't want to cite a number because I don't trust any of them. If the Iranians are killing 20,000 of their own citizens, I mean, they admit to 5,000, 6,000, I can't remember what the number was, but they're killing lots of their own citizens. I've heard you say recently there's a lot of bad actors in a lot of places in the world. Does America at this point, in your estimation, just take a step back from everything? Is there anything that America should intervene in? It's not, I presume you don't want sanctions in a lot of these situations. Militarily, definitely not. So do you just give a strongly worded speech at the UN and wash your hands of it? Where should America, be concerned or
provide
take
for the
action?
mutual defense of a place like Taiwan, for example?
Yeah, Taiwan's a good example. Ukraine is a good example. I mean, obviously, in 2014, I think it was in one of your books where you said, Putin takes Crimea. What are we going to do? We're not going to go to war with the Russians, and that's true. We're not going to go to war with the Russians. So, what is America's responsibility in the world that we built, which is a cribbing from the subtitle of your book?
That world that no longer really exists, but. There's two layers to that. When it comes to U.S. allies, I believe those are ironclad commitments. And so if you are a treaty ally of the United States—
Ukraine?
They're not a treaty ally of the United States.
Not a treaty ally, but give up your nuclear weapons and we'll provide an umbrella for you. I mean, it's something, isn't it?
It's not, we didn't, but there is a mutual collective defense guarantee that is a part of NATO and that has been given to Japan and South Korea and the Philippines, by the way, which could be tested with the Chinese, that obligates military intervention on their behalf.
Unlike, say, a major non-NATO ally. That's not
Unlike,
the
say, a
level.
major non-NATO ally. Taiwan, for instance, we have a legal obligation under the Taiwan Relations Act to help them defend themselves, which is basically telling both the Taiwanese and the Chinese, we will be arming these people so that you don't invade them. There's a legal basis because you need predictability in world. I think we're feeling what it's like to have no predictability. Now, in these other circumstances, again, I know I'm going to be the internationalist on this piece, and this is why it's not isolationism. I mean, I think you need to invest in an international system that can help solve those problems. You need, in some cases, if we had the UN functioning as it did, for instance, in the 90s, there'd be an international peacekeeping force in a place like the Democratic Republic of Congo today. There'd be a much more likelihood that you would go to the United Nations when something like the massacre of protesters is happening in Iran. And yes, does it seem like strongly worded statements or feckless? Sure. But if you kind of create the basis that you're going to be called in front of most of the rest of the world and called to account, I think what we're seeing now is the diminishing of that reality of that idea that there's a set of rules that everybody has to follow, and if you break them, you may not immediately be bombed, but you're going to essentially have to be held to account by some number of countries. That's better than this kind of ad hoc, when we see a nail, we pick up our hammer. Because, honestly, I'm informed by results here. Like, we have 25 years post 9/11 where pretty much everywhere we've intervened militarily is worse from certainly a humanitarian and political standpoint. And because, look at the war in Iran.
Is worse on account of the intervention, you think?
No, I think it's contributed to it. If you look at Iran, for instance, ostensibly, in Trump's own words, part of the reason we intervened was to help those people. Those people are far worse off because we tried to help them, if that's what we were actually trying to do. The regime is more repressive. Some of those people have been killed by our own airstrikes. And so I think I had to deprogram myself. Like, there's an instinct in a foreign policy and national security person that if a bad person is harming his own people, that we will help them by bombing the regime of that bad person. Mm-hmm. And I actually just don't think there's a lot of, Yugoslavia is one example, but there's not that many examples.
But what do you do, Ben? The 90s also gave us Rwanda, right?
Yeah,
there
a lot
was
of white helmets.
No intervention to prevent people being, hacked to death with swords and knives in just the most primitive way. And that is, you go back and we read Philip Gorovich's book about it. It was a fantastic book. Yeah. It's like, do you do nothing always because we can't bomb, we can't sanction, and it's a strongly worded speech? Does that not incentivize the bad guys in the world if we know that stuff is always off the table?
I think what you try to do this through institutions instead of the United States. So even in Yugoslavia, you had the United Nations Security Council involved. You had NATO involved as an institution. You had the European Union involved. I think in a Rwanda-type scenario, look, we had some cases in Africa where, for instance, in Cote d'Ivoire, there was an election. There was this guy, Gbagbo. Mm-hmm. He lost the election. He refused to leave power. It was starting to look like it was going to go down one of those slippery slopes that could lead to war. And what we did is we worked with the regional organization, ECOWAS, which is the association essentially of West African states, to collectively start to put pressure on Gbagbo, some sanctions. So again, there's places for sanctions, there's places for pressure. But if you channel that through institutions, the UN, or in Africa, like if in Rwanda, like a concerted effort to get the African Union involved with the United States and a collection of European countries that have some leverage on Rwanda. And reading that book and Samantha Power's book, who's a friend of mine, there are other things you could have done to include, blocking radio signals that were being used to tell people to go kill Hutus or sanctioning leaders or, yes, potentially threatening military force, but saying it's not just going to be like we're going to send in Delta Force or SEALs. We're going to try to assemble some neighboring states and say, like, hey, if you don't stop this, yes, there's a threat. But it's done institutionally under like a whole set of rules that people understand. And it doesn't just feel like the U.S., because I'll tell you what it feels like to the rest of the world. It feels like the U.S. only cares, take human rights violations. We care a lot about human rights violations only when it's geopolitical adversaries of the United States. So we care when it's Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, Russia. We don't care if it's Saudi Arabia. We don't care if it's some dictator we're friends with, and that creates an opening that allows like a Putin to drive a truck through it. You need to have like a one set of rules and a set of institutions that you're bringing to bear on that. If that sounds Pollyannish, that is actually how things were, until fairly recently.
Kind of. There's always been double standards.
That's the Gene Kirkpatrick.
Yeah, but you're also never going to eliminate dictatorships in the world. You're never going to. I think we've gotten ourselves into trouble by thinking that our government is our system is a one size fits all for people, or so I do think you have to accept, at some point and I think it was in that post Cold War moment when we felt like everything was moving in our direction, we suddenly felt like we could solve every one of these problems, and I think we've demonstrated that we can't.
listening to you right now, I'm thinking of how much or how little daylight there might be between some of the way that you're talking about, like Donald Trump's speech in Saudi Arabia. It's like, we're not going to tell you how to live. We're not going to, impose our Jeffersonian democracies, and give you finger wagging lectures. We're going to sort of accept that there are regional powers that are going to have their spheres of influence here. It seems to me the biggest area of difference between at least sort of
he doesn't mean it.
Articulated.
Besides the fact that he doesn't mean it.
Articulated MAGA, right? Sort
Yeah.
of like the people who are less interventionist on the right, and a lot of libertarians are like this too, who might be nodding in agreement. The big difference that you have between sort of that theory of it is just that you want more of a 90s style international institutions, not tearing down NATO, trying to bump up NATO, but yet you are being similarly not eager to intervene. Like you're getting closer to Tucker Carlson.
I'm similarly anti-war, and I say.
Are you similarly anti-Semitic?
No. Despite what some people may say, I guess I'm a self-hating Jew more than anti-Semitic too. But no. I think that
we got a clip
from his bar mitzvah.
The differentiation is twofold and important. And because first of all, I actually don't think he believes it because he's bombed a bunch of countries.
There's that.
But number one, it's this. I actually believe in multilateralism. I believe in collective action. I believe in working through institutions internationally, whether it's the World Health Organization or whether it's the United Nations or what have you, and rules associated with that. I believe in laws of war. I believe in international humanitarian law, right? So that's a pretty big difference because it's not saying like we're taking everything and going home and then we're just kind of trying to solve everything bilaterally. It's saying we want to channel our strength into a set of institutions and work together with a broad range of countries. I'd be doing that on artificial intelligence right now, for instance. Like, what are the kind of collective norms and rules that we can put around this? But secondly, this doesn't mean you excise values. There's ways to incentivize values. And so, for instance, I do believe the United States should be outspoken in support of civil society and activists around the world. And also you can put that into, you want a trade agreement with us? Like, well, we'd like to see you, among other things, sure, we'd like to see you buy more of these widgets from the United States. We'd also have a list of people that you need to release from prison. And we also think that you need to free up your media space. Like, I think you can do things through incentivization and not just disincentivization. And Trump has kind of stripped out values from that. And by the way, that's not a new idea. The U.S. used to introduce a lot of values propositions into incentives. Trump just does, tariffs and, it's all a transaction based on, China, you buy more soybeans or something, right? And so I think there's a values proposition that matters. But at the end of the day, I also think we have to realize that as someone who talks to a lot of democracy activists around the world, like the thing that we can do that is most useful to them is demonstrate democracy, like show that this is a system that works. Because right now, one of the worst things working against people who care about small d democracy is maybe the Chinese model looks a little better,
I see too much of that myself. And I want to get back to that, but you said, the excuses that people like Putin make when they see American hypocrisy. I mean, what you're saying is also what Putin used with Maidan, right? I mean, America supporting, it's like Vicki Nuland, and this was a democratically elected leader, and Yanukovych is pushed out because America's supporting it from, like National Endowment for Democracy, whatever they're flagging these days. But if you get involved in that way in civil society, it's often said the same thing in Cuba. The CIA was sponsoring Cuban rap acts and doing all this stuff. Or Radio Marti. We're always intervening, even in a soft power way, that does give dictators like Vladimir Putin the exact same argument. They make this argument. It's made on the Tucker Carlson right now, too, about, well, it was our fault. We provoked the invasion of Ukraine primarily because of the soft power stuff, not even funding the Ukrainians in X, Y, and Z way, because we were responsible for the color revolutions. We supported those things through democratic institutions, civil society institutions, and giving them money. It's not just George Soros and open society. It's us. It's the government. But doesn't that work against kind of the same argument that you're making, that we have to kind of retreat from the world, not give them these excuses, but then also use this kind of soft power?
I think that that's different, and you're right to raise it. And look, I think that I would continue to do that type of soft power work and be very transparent about it. And basically, frankly, what I'd say too, by the way, is the Chinese and Russians do that too. I mean, the Chinese have Confucius centers across Africa, and they fund universities around the world. Russia has RT. So no, I make no apologies for the United States showing up, spreading its message, providing resources to people. I do think we should be radically transparent about it, though, right? Like one of my I had a problem with when I was negotiating with the Cubans. There were some stories that came out about some weird program to like try to spread spread chaos on Twitter or something. And I was like, well, I got to look into I didn't know about that program, which would have been useful to know if I was, negotiating with these people. And I dug into kind of the USAID, this is not CIA, like USAID funding for the, Cuban opposition or dissidents. And I found a couple things. One is some of this was literally like, opaque payments to PO boxes in like Miami. Like where nobody could even say like what we were literally just kind of like just created a slush fund and we're like dumping money to groups based in Miami who were doing God knows what. And I in the White House had no idea where that money ended up. And similarly, what I found is the Cubans had infiltrated. Alejandro Castro, who was the guy I was negotiating with, used to joke with me, and I actually think he was telling the truth. That some of that money reached them because they penetrated some of these groups. And so I say that to make the point that why have subterfuge about it? In some ways, the United States needs to function more normally in the world. Like we're going to show up and I'll be self-critical too, by the way. We self-censored to some extent in how much we would criticize, say, a China. They don't self-censor when they criticize us about our politics. Like us having a message, us having broadcasting, us having support for civil society, we should do that, and we should just do it out in the open. And if Putin wants to say, "I hate,"
you do it above ground. I mean, you can't send a bundle of cash to Yoni Sanchez and the dissident journalists, right? I mean, you have to do it through subterfuge because these governments don't allow it, right? I mean, obviously, and I've heard you mention it, that banning people who are foreign actors. I don't even know what it's called in Russia. They have, and if you say
foreign agents or something.
Like, and if you look at Russian newspapers, the KP, and all these things, it'll say if they mention somebody, there's always an asterisk at the bottom. It says this person has been identified by the Kremlin as a foreign actor. And if you do it above ground, I mean, you have to do it through subterfuge, don't you? If you want to support these things, there's no above ground way of supporting Navalny rest in peace, who I know you knew and you wrote about in your book, but there's no way of doing that. I mean, you kind of have to do it in that furtive way.
I think that you get an interesting terrain here. I think that when you're talking about a place like Ukraine, pre-war, or you're talking about parts of Southeast Asia or what have you. I think you can do it above ground and transparently. If you're talking about places where people are extremely vulnerable like that, I think you actually have to ask yourself, am I helping this person by trying to get them a few $100,000? Like, I actually think you can put people at risk.
They can say no, too. Right?
They can say no. So first of all, always be guided by the people you're trying to help. Yeah. and Navalny would always say, like, I actually don't want your resources. I want to be able to credibly stand up in front of Russians and say, and actually he drew a differentiation between himself and some other kind of Russian oppositionists who did get more Western support by saying, I built a media company. I built an investigative journalism enterprise here. I take no money from the West. It's
and
funded.
they murdered him.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But he knew he was taking that risk too.
Yeah.
And I don't think he could have left too at any time and gotten safe haven in the West. That was his choice. I texted with Navalny. I talked to him kind of throughout the pandemic when he was, not throughout, but several times in the pandemic when he was in Russia.
Isn't that itself risky?
Yeah, but he
Member
did it.
of the Obama
He
administration
did it on
was texting?
FaceTime. He wanted them to know. Like,
Yeah.
he was radically transparent. And I remember texting with him when he was in Germany after he'd been poisoned and he was about to go back into Russia. It's kind of a funny exchange because it was my last book after the fall, and I was like, I told everyone I talked to that I would clear my quotes with them. Mm-hmm. So I was like, hey, here are all these quotes. And he's like, Ben, I don't give a fuck about your quotes. Like, it's fine. He's like, they already know what I told you. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I was like, all right. And he's like, and I was like, why? Are you really want to go back? Why are you doing that? And he's like, I have no choice. You know, like he
They're incredibly brave. And Boris Nemtsov, people like that.
Yeah, that kind of. And I had a podcast, Another Russia, with Zhana Nemtsova, Boris's daughter, who's a very close friend of mine. She said the same thing. Nemtsov was in Israel a few weeks before he was killed. And she begged him, don't go back, stay there, you're safe. And he says, I have to go back, right? So some of these people...
And he was killed in front of the Kremlin.
On a bridge.
On a bridge right in front of
him. But some of these people, you have to realize, like, they're fighting their battle their way. They know, they may know that they're not going to live to see the fruits of what they're doing. But again, I actually think that for the people like that, I don't know, the United States funneling them a few $100,000 or even a few $1 million through subterfuge isn't going to be the thing that tips it over. I think what they need more from us is we can shine a massive what I do for people like that is we should have a much more substantial media capacity in our government, like the Russians and Chinese do, where we are just, and this is what we did in the Cold War, by the way. We are spotlighting the hell out of what they're doing to people inside of Russia. And we are trying to bring the news to Russians even. We're trying to broadcast into Russia and evade their own firewalls.
I mean, what Trump has done there is disgraceful.
You see what I mean, though? It's like
Radio Free Europe, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then also just putting Pam Bondi
in
charge of this is that, I would prefer some of the dictators to Pam Bondi.
Because your point is really important, and it's important to press like my worldview on this. And these are the people I admire more than anyone in the world. But I think that being a source of amplification for them is probably more useful than whatever resources you might be able to get to them through subterfuge.
Let's tie this to your book, because you have a new book out, Pub Today, about 15 important American speeches about
always say.
Always say. And one of those speeches that you look at is Reagan's Evil Empire speech. This is pursuant to all of that. You talk to dissidents in Central Europe who were there at the time. That speech means a lot to them because they feel like he was calling a spade, using using true words and language to describe a thing. I didn't get a full sense that you were totally on board with him using that phrase in that chapter. Were you? Do you think that was the right thing for him to do?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I was totally on board with the totality of Reagan's policy for this reason. The evil empire, what's so fascinating about that speech is because the speeches I selected have to do with like identity, like what is America, who is American, like what do we stand for in the world. So it's not just great speeches; it's speeches that in different ways try to answer that question because I think that's the debate we're actually having today. Reagan gave that speech at the National Association of Evangelicals,
Florida,
and it's a fascinating speech because in 2/3 of that speech has nothing to do with, so everybody knows about that speech of the evil empire. 2/3 of that speech is about essentially the interests of Christian evangelicals, abortion and prayer in school and the kind of, secular bureaucracy of the big government. But what I saw him doing skillfully as someone who's on the other side of a lot of the political divide with him is he's like speaking his coalition into being here. It's Christian conservatives, free market people, and national security hawks and Cold War hawks.
Three-legged stool.
And the old three-legged stool before MAGA. And he seamlessly, evil empire is connected to the religiosity that he's talking about in the United States. He builds an argument that we as the United States have to support a set of Christian values, and the communists are godless. And so we stand for a set of values, including the value of human life, right? The pro-life is somehow connected to evil empire because they don't value human life. They worship man and not God. It's actually a highly intellectual speech. Reagan gets short shrift as an intellect.
I mean, he's right about that. But go on.
And so I would not have followed a journey that got me to the phrase evil empire.
Were they an evil empire though?
I personally, the absolutism of a word evil makes me uncomfortable. However, I'm going to provide space. I can't argue with the fact that what Reagan did, and this is why I concede its effectiveness, he created a moral basis for his policy. He created a contrast between the U.S. and the Soviet Union that was not just about power. It was about something that meant something. It wasn't like a Strait of Hormuz or a nuclear program. It was a higher purpose. He deployed that in ways that clearly had a positive impact on people on the other side of the Iron Curtain. And then, fascinatingly, when a door opened, because for each chapter I kind of, what are the origins? Where did the speech come from? What movement, what coalition, what person? And then I followed out of the speech, Gorbachev comes along and he's like, oh, wait a second. Here's a guy I can deal with. And he deals with Gorbachev. Gorbachev starts dismantling some of the infrastructure of Soviet repression and foreign policy. And so by the time Reagan travels to Moscow in 1988, he's asked, hey, do you still think it's an evil empire? And he says, no. I thought that at the time, and that was a different time.
He basically says things have changed.
Things have changed, right?
Which they
absolutely had. And so what I was struck by is Reagan combined, and I left writing this book admiring Reagan more. I left feeling like what was so interesting about Reagan is he was simultaneously ideological in a way that could lead him to say this is an evil empire, but pragmatic enough to say, they changed. Now I want to deal with them, right? And I just loved that. I thought that was so refreshing in our kind of dogmatic times that the combination of both, you can say evil empire, but then you can say you've changed your mind, and both are right.
I mean, there's the Václav Havel thing about calling things by their proper names, that there is power associated with that.
I agree with that.
And just the evil.
I agree with him on that. But it is to the point that the number of people who had internalized what we thought about Reagan in the kind of larger media landscape, the cowboy,
dummy,
the guy who's a dummy, shooting from the hip, and I think even the Soviets believe that, and he gets to Reykjavik and then sidebars and says, why don't we just eliminate all nuclear weapons? And everyone's like, what the fuck is happening here? And it's like, no, you didn't really know Reagan in that sense. There's a very good book about this. And I think the name of the book is Ronald Reagan and His Quest to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which is influenced by his daughter in so many ways, influenced by his religion. But these kind of silly ideas about Reagan that in the moment were very politically salient and pungent turned out in a lot of ways not to be true. And I think I think he was right to call it the evil empire. It was absolutely an evil empire. And to pull back from it and say that this is a man I can deal with, both of them said that, Gorbachev and Reagan. But of course, Gorbachev's goal was not the dismantlement of the Soviet Union. And it's like you got that going and you couldn't put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Yeah. So. But I think that, so first of all, Reagan fascinated me because his whole life produced that speech, and that's what I kept running into in this book. Like, you have to understand the entire life of when the power of a truly consequential speech is informed by every experience that fed into it. And so this is a guy who, first of all, cut his teeth as a communicator. Because one of his first jobs was like a radio announcer, and he had one of those jobs where like you're not at the game, you get the telegraph, and you have to like make up what happened.
Yeah, that's right.
And so he developed a skill to just paint a word picture for people in a simple language. Then he has this movie career where he's playing the kinds of people that Americans, respect, like the
Newt Rockney,
the Newt Rockney, or the stranger who shows up in town to fix the problem, and then he gets more political, and then he vaults to prominence in 1964 with the Time for Choosing speech, where Barry Goldwater is running. Barry Goldwater comes across like an asshole, and Reagan believes the same things, but he was able to present them in this genial way, builds this coalition that is informed by what he cares about, which is he's religious, he has conservative small c values, but he believes in so much in American freedom that he also was very pro-immigration. Like Reagan's the last guy that did an amnesty in this country, right? He had a coherent and consistent worldview that all of which kind of fed into both that speech and his capacity to see Gorbachev for what he was. And frankly, I think if Reagan had, say, 8 more years, I probably think he wouldn't have grinded the Soviets and Russians' nose into defeat in the same way that we ended up doing under Bush and Clinton, because he would have given them the soft landing that would have ended the Soviet Union entirely and might have made it less likely that a Putin emerged on the other end, because he had that instinct for people.
I'm going to avoid the possibility.
Should I avoid that?
We can sidebar on that.
We can sidebar on that afterwards, because
Yeah.
we'll probably go off into different territory.
We didn't make them suffer enough.
Well,
God
The
damn it.
mass privatization, they were like, we're going to come in, we're going to send some people in here and sell off all your state-run assets, and that stuff.
One of whom now makes a career on podcasts blaming the United States for
Everything.
Which is fascinating, by the way.
Fascinating.
He shows up a lot in that era.
So, Michael, Kmele,
Yes.
have you been looking at groundnews.com/fifth today?
Yes.
I look at it every day.
All
I
the
have to say,
time.
I look at it every day. Yes, I look at Ground News.
Totally organic product endorsement.
Did you discover anything that was interesting
Did
today?
I discover something? Did I? Me personally?
You, Michael Moynihan.
Yes, I did.
Michael Daniel Patrick Moynihan.
Yes, I did.
What did you find?
Well, this is what we always talk about the blind spot stuff in bias left and right, and this is a bias for the right, and the left is not paying attention. But I found something interesting today in Ground News, because I didn't know that they did the bias meter for France. They have French left and right translated headlines and everything.
There's a right in France?
No, there's a couple of websites, and they're really paying attention to the story that the justice minister in France called for a 3-year halt to legal immigration in France.
Oh.
That is an enormous story. At 67% right, 11% center, and the left is only 22%. So I learned something new, and I learned something new about Ground News, is that they're judging the biases of the political media
frogs
in France.
67, so 2 out of 3.
2 out of 3. So it is the two.
So Figaro and I'm trying to the Catholic
Well, they have
newspaper.
a right-wing one that's at Fox News now. See something?
Chrétien.
Yeah. But yeah, that's what I learned today, Matt, from Ground News.
Well, how do you get to Ground News, Kmele, to get the unlimited access Vantage plan?
You go to groundnews.com/fifth.
Fifth.
Matt Welch.
What do you get with the unlimited access?
40% off the unlimited access Vantage plan. Unlimited access Vantage
Sounds like your favorite 4 words in the English
I
language.
mean, yeah, it could be. I think it's certainly a stellar deal. And in all seriousness, Ground News produces a very good product, which we have been fans of since before they were sponsors and will continue to be fans of going into the future, I'm sure, because they just do a really great job of curating the news, of offering us this additional context. You get to compare titles on these articles from the left and the right. They give you these great synopsises. They even give you local news in addition to international coverage. So Ground News, a great, great, great value.
Groundnews.com/fifth.
Sign up. 40% off.
Unlimited access Vantage plan.
I look at just the totality of your stuff since the Obama administration. I know you'll push back on this, but it's just unrelentingly negative is how I came away from this, is that America's not a force for good in the world at this point, that capitalism has been, I mean, I think the word unbridled and capitalism in your 2001 book appeared 5 times.
Yeah.
You don't see a lot of positive things on the horizon or for the past kind of 20, I know the Obama administration, you take out of that. But tell me, am I wrong in thinking that Ben Rhodes has an incredibly negative view of the United States now? And I want to be clear about this, not that you're an anti-American, that you don't believe in the American project, but you don't have a very positive vision of what America is today, where it has been since the end of the Cold War. I mean, there's a bit in your book about Hungary when you say, it's like, was it so much worse previously with Viktor Orban now? And I'm sitting there going, yeah, no, it is better. Even though Viktor Orban is a complete bastard and was walked out of there in an election that he lost handily, I don't think that he would have walked away if he didn't lose by such a wide margin. I would agree on that. But I just get an overall negative idea from reading your stuff. The speech is obviously different, but the previous book, the 2021 book, and your podcast, it's just like, I know, and take Trump out of it.
Yeah.
Very hard to do, but take Trump out of it. What is it? Am I wrong in thinking that?
Yes and no. I will say this, like, meaning it fully, which is the negativity is informed by how much I love America. And I think if you read, again, this book, what a singular country that could produce, just the names Ben Franklin and Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass and some of these, Anna Dickinson, who's a woman who blew me away in this book, and FDR and Reagan, right? And they could simultaneously stand for the construction of this massively powerful and wealthy nation state and this kind of constant continued effort at self-improvement and trying to right wrongs and extend rights to more people. And so much so that the kind of energy of this country kind of washed over the world after World War II in ways that changed a lot of places for the better. I still believe that as someone who travels a lot and deals a lot with the democracy activists, like, people desperately want us to be the better version of ourselves because that makes their life better, intuitively, either because like a policy that we're doing helps them, or just because when America is doing things in the right way, no matter who the leader is, or even American culture is the right way, there's this kind of magnetic pull towards it. I've become more negative and have been very negative because I do feel like we've kind of taken a turn off the rails and are moving in the wrong direction. And so I'm like, I'm being more and more negative because I feel like we're getting more and more away from the things that I love about America. And that cuts across.
That's why I say it's hard to excise Trump from this, obviously.
It's hard to excise Trump, but I think that, look, let's take Trump and put him over here for a second. I like unbridled capitalism. I do feel like the version of American capitalism that was not perfect by any stretch, but predominant until relatively recently, built stuff. It wasn't just financial capitalism. It wasn't just profit margin, right? It wasn't just market based.
I mean, financial, all that stuff builds stuff too.
It destroys a lot of stuff too, though, right? I mean, it can just private equity can come in and look at what's happening to our media sector, right? And so there,
the media sector's losing audience. There's structural. The media's been in decline since 1990.
It's decline changing. I think. Yeah, depends on how you look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
you guys have a pretty big media outlet. Don't you?
No, we do, but I would like I feel like if you look across the society, and I'm implicating, if you look at the finance sector, the tech sector, the national security community, you name it, it just feels like we have gotten further and further away from connecting back to any kind of common purpose. And again, that's why I actually wanted to write the book. Like, what is our identity? That's what I was.
Is that a technology thing, though? I mean, it's
in part. Yeah.
I don't. We have these kind of ideas of the halcyon days when, everyone worked at the factory and then went down to the bar afterwards and the communities were closer. I mean, it's also very much a populist and nativist argument too. Not your version of it, but you hear this quite a bit from that. I think a lot of that's a fantasy for a time that didn't exist, and jobs that were actually terrible too and didn't pay great.
Nostalgianomics.
Yeah, nostalgianomics, but we do, our manufacturing sector is larger than it's ever been. It's just with fewer people. So I think that technology is probably what you're talking about, right? What I'm trying to figure out is how do you bridle the capitalism, and how would you bridle it?
Regulation is a simple answer, but I'd try to get more specific about that. I feel like if you, because part of what happened is, a lot of constraints under Reagan and Clinton, and continuing under Obama, were removed from different sectors, banking sectors and others. But let's just take tech today, right? AI is going to be obviously transformed for our economy and for our society. And it is generating the profit margin that is sustaining the market, right? And yet, most people in this country have no idea what it's going to do. They're unsure about it, and so
it's true of the AI sector. I don't think they know what it's going to do.
It is, and I think in a normal, healthy environment, we would have a political system that would facilitate a capacity for people through their various representatives to work with industry to say, wait a second, what is the purpose of this technology? How do we optimize the good? And how do we guard against and bridle the bad? Because I'm sure people want efficiency. I'm sure people want convenience. I'm sure people want growth. I'm sure people also don't want their teenager's best friend to be a chatbot or to disappear into AI porn. They don't want someone developing. They don't want biological.
I'm still interested in regular porn. Thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly. They don't want biological weapons to be developed by large language models. They don't want. They want job displacement to be managed so that whole sectors don't start getting wiped out. And so I think if you look at previous, and we've been through this before, by the way. I mean, after the Industrial Revolution, and it was interesting reliving American populism in this book, we kind of went through a phase where it was unbridled. It felt excessive to people. And you got a progressive era. And that's when you got a whole bunch of reforms. That's when you got everything from a Federal Reserve to child labor laws to the direct election of senators. It was like, whoa, wait a second. This whole society.
Income tax.
Income tax. You may not like everything, but there was a sense of we as a country need to kind of figure, okay, the Industrial Revolution is changing everything. Technology is changing everything. Wealth is being concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, which means power is being concentrated in fewer hands. There was a lot of political corruption in that era too, as there is today. And so then you got an era of government reform and really active citizenship too. And that's when women got the right to vote. So I just kind of feel like we're in one of those moments where the tether is broken and we're kind of floating off, and we have to come.
And that's the direction your party is going in, for sure. Do you think that's true?
I don't think I think the Democratic Party doesn't know what its purpose is right now. And so what we end up doing is we end up trying to, there's this safety net that is just ripping at the seams, and we're like, let's get you some Obamacare subsidies, or let's build some more affordable housing. And it's not dealing with the bigger questions of how is my kid going to make a living? And what does it even mean to be American in the 21st century? Mm-hmm. And what do we stand for in the world? I mean, there's there's war, there's AI, there is rampant inequality. And there's also just a sense of I don't know how, my kid's going to have it better than me, which is something that people used to take for some granted.
Although we've been hearing that exact thing every single generation.
But now there's actual, I think, metrics that back it up, how old do you have to be before you can buy a house, for instance? Mm-hmm. Or, and so I think that, and again, that's why I went to speeches and storytelling, because it's I think people need to step back and think about what is this all about? Like where are we going?
Can I offer? Sorry, quickly, just offer a counter to that, just on the speeches. And I mean, obviously, speechwriter, and I mean, you've spoken about how speeches tell the story for people of America. And I mean, there's a lot of great speeches in the book. There's a few. I'm okay about. It's fine. We'll get that later. We can talk about that. But
they're not all supposed to be.
They're not all supposed to be great speeches.
I mean, they serve a different purpose.
You do end on Donald
the Confederate
Trump.
vice president.
Confederate vice president.
I'm trying to show the whole story.
I was saying, couldn't get a Jefferson Davis speech, but I wonder if, in the long run, it's what will harm the Democratic Party in the way that it is harming the Republican Party. Is that if the kind of left populism takes hold of the party, and it seems to me that that's certainly the direction it's going, and goes out into the world, wins control of Congress, wins the presidency, I don't believe any of those ideas can actually take hold in America. It's a very easy thing to say that there's a giant sucking sound from NAFTA, but those jobs aren't coming back, and the people who promise that they're coming back are lying to you. And the problem, I think, with a lot of
Trump is one of those people.
He absolutely. I mean, he's worse than anyone on this. But in the kind of Elizabeth Warren, we need more regulation. I mean, did we regulate Spirit Airlines out of business for not being able to merge? That kind of stuff, I just wonder if in the long term, that doesn't hurt the Democratic Party brand in the way that it's currently hurting the Republican Party brand, who has said that we can tariff our way back to prosperity. We can get rid of the income tax, for Christ's sake. Because those promises that we can redistribute wealth and have a dynamic economy. Look, obviously I'm coming at this from a very, very different ideological perspective, but I just don't see where that and how that can work. I mean, the countries that have gone towards that, like Sweden did in the 70s and 80s, had to double back on that and have lower corporate tax rates and more billionaires per capita than America does. So is that not a fear that the wonderful rhetoric of redistributing wealth and making sure that everybody has wine and roses won't backfire because it's a really difficult thing politically to implement?
So, and here we'll have a disagreement, a respectful disagreement. And I'd say two things about that. One is about regulation, one is about taxation. I actually believe, and I've said this to audiences of tech people, and including tech leaders. At this point, we've gotten to a point where sensible regulation is necessary to prevent the very regulatory capture you're afraid of. I mean, I actually think that if AI continues to if AI diffusion continues at pace, there will be events that lead to like turning these frontier companies into national labs. I mean, as I'm speaking as a national security guy, like wait till the biological, weapon is like unleashed in the society, and then all of a sudden people are going to say, we have to take over these places. I mean, so I think like the idea that you're going to sit down and say, hey, look, you can't release a model without the government reviewing it and having some agreed upon testing mechanism. And again, how you define that.
It seems to be the opposite now that Anthropic is telling the government
to do that. Yeah. He's asking the government to do that. So I actually, in the same way, by the way, that if you had not, I think, gotten rid of Glass-Steagall, and if you had continued a certain kind of regulation of the banking industry, you wouldn't have had the great financial crisis of 2008. Like some regulation is for not just the good of, the little guy. It's actually for the good of and health of the industry. I think where I probably differ from you more is on this taxation question. I just think that there are and somewhere between like Elizabeth Warren and a libertarian view of corporate taxes. I'm not saying you go all the way there, but I just think that the economy. I've reached an age where I've seen people get wealthy to an extent that feels completely unnecessary. I mean, I remember I moved to Los Angeles and, was driving down the street one day and I saw like a pet spa go by. And that's a random anecdote. But the point is that like most people literally can't afford things. Like they can't afford their house. They can't afford a a car. They can't afford, to buy groceries.
So shut down the pet spas.
I'm saying tax wealth. I think there's no need for nobody should
have the most progressive tax system in the world, according to the OECD.
Why does Elon Musk have over $100 billion? That should not happen. That should be impossible. It should be literally impossible for someone to have that much money.
What if he's created that much value?
He's creating, but that's my point, is that value is not reaching people. It's reaching him and a set of shareholders or investors. I just think that's where I mean, like, the wealth has gotten, out, to my view, has gotten way out of whack. I mean, why?
What's enough money? Do the Obamas have too much money?
I think when we get into sure, fine, but I think it's really when you're getting
trying to take my money.
I think it's when you're really when you're getting into the billionaire class, and also just the kind of because I'm not a tax expert, but I also know that there is a tax system that facilitates people avoiding taxes, or there are carried interest loopholes that allow people to avoid paying annual taxes in the way that individuals do. Like there are ways that you can reform the tax code that could generate a lot of revenue, that could pay for a lot of things, without, I think, stifling innovation to the extent that. And honestly, here's what I'd say: if our system was working the way it should, the ideal outcome would actually not be like Elizabeth Warren winning that debate or you. It would be someone with her view and someone with your view sitting down and rewriting the tax code to generate more revenue. And in my view, to try to lower that excessive wealth, by the way, is going to bring the pitchforks out. I mean, Jeff Bezos buying the Met Gala for his, second wife is like everybody, while Amazon workers, are driving Ubers at night, like, people know intuitively that's wrong.
Yeah, Amazon's about the most popular company in the country. Like, people love Amazon.
But they don't love the economy it's created. I mean, and that to me is like the distinction is like people are choosing, and people are actually ultimately getting less choice. Do we really want our lives to be completely dominated by an ever shrinking number of gigantic corporate entities controlled by mega billionaires? And look, I'd say the other place I would take this is money. The money in politics is the other thing that people sense that Trump won with the message that the system is rigged, because it is, but it's rigged by money. And so I think you need a reform agenda for how government works as well as economic policies. I would say, though, to your point about populism and your point about my negativity, one thing I learned from Obama that I think is really important for Democrats and populists on the left is Obama would never come out and say, this country's bad, or this is a racist country. He'd say, this country is so great that we've been able to change in the past. Like
Michelle, Michelle a little bit less.
Yeah, Michelle. But he would invite people to kind of be a part of a continuum of change.
And was a Reagan, a close student of Reagan.
Reagan-style communicator. Like in the speech I use in this book, in the so-called race speech from 2008, he says, he speaks about the white working class, and he says, like, after detailing black structural inequality, he says, and by the way, like, white working class people in this country don't feel particularly privileged by their race, which is a pretty interesting formulation. He's like, they're the ones who have been lectured about race while they lost their jobs, while their kids were the ones bussed across town, while they feel like if they raise concerns about crime, they're going to be called racist. So, look, we have problems that cross racial boundaries, and if we can just kind of put that aside and come together and work to solve those problems, we can move this country forward. And that's a way that's so different than post-2020, where it's basically like, if you don't come out with your hands up and acknowledge white supremacy, like you're the problem. That's not what Obama did. He said, you're getting screwed too, and by different things. And by the way, this country that you're a part of made it possible for me to be here to tell you that we can keep getting better. You know, like it was in a positive mess. So I like that you're holding me accountable to my negativity because, and that's why it was.
And
fun
did
to
Obama believe that, or was that a political position?
Oh no,
you'll be called
believed
a socialist, and
you can't fake that.
Yeah,
I mean, he believed it, and took a lot of shit for it. By the way,
remember.
You know, from certain elements of his own community. You know, and so I think you're right to warn about it. I think, however, I see my role. In my various, you know, I have a kind of political identity and a national security one. I kind of do see my function as something of a, like, I'm here to try to tell some hard truths. I'm here to kind of stir a pot, you know.
Buzzkill.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not the one to tell the story that's going to necessarily get us out of it. But actually, this book is meant to be like, if we go back, we can find the good things to pull forward, which is a very Obama thing. Like, let's go back and find the pieces of the story that we want to pull into today about who we are and about how to solve problems and about how to build coalitions, because we've kind of lost that. And this is a technology problem. Like we because we're so algorithmically sorted, we don't tell each other what we think. You know, we tell people who agree with us like what we think, and or we, you know, consume information about how much we hate these other people. And I do think that we need to kind of take a step back and say, like, well, wait a second. Like, if we're all going to live in this country together, we have to start identifying again what we share in common and what we want in common, and try to design the pathway to that.
You know, there's something that I noticed when I went back and reread and listened to anyways, the Claremont Institute speech that J.D. Vance gave, which you describe in the epilogue, and then, or the prologue, I guess. But then I also listened to the More Perfect Union speech again for the first time in a couple of years. And it's a speech that I've always had some criticism of, but have a renewed appreciation for precisely the reason you underscored, like the contrast between the way Barack Obama was talking about race and identity in that speech and the way that has become kind of the predominant way that people on the left talk about those issues. It's essentially like the ascendancy of Reverend Wright's point of view. It essentially became the mainstay of democratic politics. And I think today still is. In some respects, it's kind of tamped down a bit after Biden's defeat, but it certainly hasn't gone away. I reread Obama's speech, and there were points in there that I was like, oh, that kind of sounds like J.D. Vance. In fact, it kind of sounds like J.D. Vance in the very speech that you were so critical of in the book. And I wonder if your interpretation of that speech, at least my appraisal of it, was your interpretation of it was perhaps a little too critical. Like, you represented it as a pretty pure distillation of like blood and soil politics. And I think what it actually seemed more like to me was like him saying rather explicitly, when, to the extent he talked about people who have like a heritage here in this country, and them having some sort of unique permission to be here, you're saying that contrasted against the most vociferous people on the left who he described as extremist. He also says that Democrats in general were by and large like good and noble people who were voting for things for the right reasons, but there is a certain portion of the population who are much more in line with Reverend Wright's perspective, who have this overtly negative, pessimistic view of America, who don't really believe that we've made any progress. And I think reading into Vance and perhaps even Trump to a lesser degree, because his speeches generally are a little less intellectual, but Vance's unwillingness to kind of engage with that, like America as a project with this unique defects at the founding, and just kind of rhapsodizing about how great America is, while even if it wasn't necessarily in that speech, certainly in the RNC speech later on, like they always hit those notes about, we don't care what your color, what your race is. The great Nicki Minaj just introduced me. We want to thank the black people who came out and supported us. That doesn't matter. Identity doesn't matter. What matters is merit. Like, it feels like even though there are some pretty profound disagreements between the left and the right now, the basic idea that it's the individual that ought to matter, and that amongst Vance and co, even Donald Trump, like there isn't this particular overt emphasis on race and identity in the way that is often insisted upon by their critics. And I thought maybe you were a bit too harsh there and perhaps not acknowledging explicitly enough the way that Barack Obama essentially gave them the blueprint for talking about these issues, and for criticizing precisely these people.
I think what I take your point. I think where I part company and where I guess I felt the need to kind of rebut is J.D. Vance expressly says in that speech, and has said in other venues, that he rejects the idea that the United States is a nation rooted in a creed.
Right.
And then he's very specific that the creed he's talking about is the Declaration of Independence, that first sentence, all men are created equal and they're endowed with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then kind of speaks to a heritage-based nationalism. He says we are a particular people from a particular place with a particular way of life. Now, I'll give my criticism, but then I will try to come in your direction because I think you make a really important point that people like me need to keep in mind. I felt like, wait a second. Not only do I believe we're a nation based in a creed, I kind of take issue with even the kind of overwhelming logic, and J.D. Vance is very good at creating kind of logic momentum. Because it was really interesting reading that speech after writing this book, because particular place seems obvious, except when you think about the fact that, well, we were 13 states along the Northeast when it started. Like, we kind of really aren't a particular place. We're just kind of ever-growing, enterprise.
About ready to add a 51st.
Yeah,
state.
Even to this day, we have territories that have kind of ambiguous status. Guam and Puerto Rico. Then you take particular people. That one I don't get who those people are then. Because
I mean, isn't every national story amorphous in precisely those sorts of ways? Like the national origins of any country are going to be somewhat amorphous at the beginning, and then it kind of distills into something. And when I hear him talking and I interpret it in the most charitable way, it's something that's brought. I do it with everyone, but it's something that seems broadly inclusive. What he's saying there doesn't seem to exclude the Africans brought here in bondage, whose descendants would go on to give us Michelle Obama. Like those people are part of that story too, and part of that heritage. It is certainly the case, and this is part of the reason why when I heard about your book and I knew we were going to talk to you, I was like excited to have the conversation because I share your concern about this. Like America is a creedal nation, and there is an active conversation about whether or not that's true and the degree to which that's true. But it doesn't really seem like the worst kind of advocates for the alternative point of view are the J.D. Vances of the world. It's some weird, not quite subterranean collection of people who are both online and in public life in different contexts.
Yeah, I guess I'd or Alexander Stevens, who I have in the book. But I guess when I hear J.D. Vance say, so first of all, I do think some nations. I think America is uniquely creedal. I mean, most nations
this is true too,
have some tether to an ethnic identity. Han Chinese, ethnic Russians. They're diverse populations, but at core, there's an identity that really is, an ethnic nationalism or a religious-based nationalism. And then I also maybe I'm being too cynical about J.D. Vance because I hear dog whistles in there, when he talks about, I think someone whose ancestors say who fought in the Civil War. And so when I hear J.D. Vance, I kind of hear him saying everybody can be here, but you kind of have to accept that there's a predominant people and way of life, and that if you just accept that.
Do you think he means that in a racial sense?
I think he does, Now, again, I want to
marry an Indian woman.
Yeah, and he talks about his kids in those contexts.
No, but he's servicing an agenda that is dismantling the civil rights movement and deporting overwhelmingly, black and brown people. I may be, you're right, like I may be seeing the worst version of his story, And part of his story is like, so to kind of try to meet you on this one, I probably take a pretty aggressively universalist view of American identity. I truly do think that. So I had the Douglass speech where Frederick Douglass says, it's an amazing thing. He gives a speech right after the Civil War. He's just fighting to get black people the right to vote. And he gives a speech defending Chinese immigration. Because he says, they have to be as American as I am if this is really multiracial democracy. And that was wildly controversial. I was like, that's great. I don't think my story should win. I think actually if you were to shorthand it, that these two stories, like the one that leads, from, through Frederick Douglass to Barack Obama, and one that leads, through whomever, I won't even pick the worst versions, but leads to Trump. It's the kind of conversation and competition and tug of war between, immigration is a good example. Like, do I think we should have open borders? Absolutely not. But do I think we should seal the borders and not let anybody in and deport everybody who's here? No. We adjudicate American identity through political competition, and I would argue, and through actually speeches are pretty central to it. Like
says the speechwriter.
Well, but imagine, it's where Martin, imagine civil rights movement without King. Imagine, even white supremacy without, John C. Calhoun and Alexander Stevens and the guys in here. I mean, I think that the thing that is most radical about Trump, and that also turns people off about some of the post-George Floyd left, is when you say, my story has to win, rather than like, we're in a competition here and we're going to election by election and community by community, we're working through this. I feel like Trump is kind of, and actually it's why I was glad to be able to include his speech, because he's just kind of declaring it over, here I am, I won. That's kind of the end of American stories, like in the Trump administration. But I probably see the worst version of J.D. Vance in a way that, I don't have to choose to do. So I appreciate your comment.
The Democratic Party a while ago abandoned something that I think was pretty core and important, was a kind of assimilationist argument. I mean, Arthur Schlesinger wrote a very good book in like the early 90s called The Disuniting of America. I mean, there was nobody who was more capital D Democrat than Schlesinger. And, national identity means a lot to people. There's a chapter in your previous book where you talk about Hungary, and it's another thing about capitalism. And you say, is a lot that people lost when this rapacious American capitalism came in, and, people are upset about that. Well, what they're also upset about is immigration, right? I mean, Germany did a very good job of extirpating the anti-Semitism that was deep in its DNA for many, many generations. And then all of a sudden, during the after October 7th, you have marches in Berlin of people shouting explicitly anti-Semitic things. And the majority of those people were recent migrants. And I think that I have so many problems with the European far-right populist right. I don't think there's a party that I would vote for there. But they are speaking to something, aren't they? Is that, we have a national identity. Now, obviously, Europe and the United States are different. Yeah. But I think that's something the Democratic Party is really allergic to, is talking about the kind of cultural change that happens through things like immigration. So to J.D. Vance's point, I don't know exactly what he's talking about, because you do have to read between the lines, and I don't want to attribute a positive or negative motivation to it. But isn't that something that I think Obama seems like the tail end of that to me, of talking about a more American ideal that is a little more assimilationist, not explicitly so. You have to be this, you have to be that. I mean, there was a time when the Dutch were requiring new immigrants to watch videos about gay marriage, which included people making out, two men kissing. And it's like, this is what you're getting in this country. That was great. It was also a hockey show on HBO. They were the original pilot of that. They showed the pilot, and they loved it. But that kind of idea is that, I mean, it seems that that's something the Democratic Party is very far from right now.
Yeah, and I think there are a couple points they make. The Douglass thing is fascinating to me, and trust me, it gets to the heart of what you're saying, because he gives a speech, and he goes, at the time, there are all these Chinese immigrants. They've been come over to work on essentially railroads or farms. They're literally
we literally have an exclusion act.
It's the same thing as what ended up happening in the 20th century with Mexicans. And they were being denied rights, and they were being persecuted, and people wanted to deport them. Never mind the fact that actually they were brought here to serve an economic purpose. Again, echoes of today. And Douglas says, there's such things as universal rights, and they just chose to come here in the same way that the Puritans chose to come here, and they can be as American as us. And he actually made a case for assimilation. He said, and by the way, they're going to go to English schools. We're not going to have to go to Chinese schools. He makes that point. It's pretty clever. Now, then the Chinese Exclusion Act is passed not that long after Douglas's speech, literally barring Chinese immigration. And you could say, oh shit, Douglas lost that argument. But it's kind of fascinating to fast forward to today and look how many Chinese Americans there are and Asian Americans. We end up changing and we assimilate, but we also change too. Imagine America.
Now we discriminate against them for being too good.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, imagine America without Chinese restaurants. It's unthinkable. And so there's a kind of hybrid where it's not like assimilation. Everybody becomes kind of uniform, but over time you get comfortable and the country changes and is I believe, truly enriched, because this would be a pretty boring country if it was just white people,
Democrats had this enormous problem with Donald Trump in the last election, is that presuming that Hispanics had a worldview.
Yeah.
And it was just going to be ours. Yeah. And it's not really.
And I think to get to today, to wade into policy for a second, I think we've learned something interesting the last two administrations. Because what we learned under Biden is the idea that this border, that you could just come across this border and say, hey, I want to claim asylum, people were really not comfortable with that. Then when mass deportation starts, people are not comfortable with that. It kind of suggests, okay, let's pretty much seal that border, but let's do what Reagan did in 1986 and legalize the people here, which, by the way, is the only bipartisan compromise. It happened under Bush, it happened under Obama, that seems like where people are. We don't want to roll it back. We don't want to deport millions of people, but we also don't want millions of people crossing the border. And, it's right. That's available as a solution, And
does that not mean that Americans, I asked you about your negativity because I'm a relentlessly positive person about politics, and I really am. I think things are getting better.
The about politics was important.
Yeah, not about my fucking life. It's a disaster. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
No, but does that not just suggest that Americans are just generically sensible people? Because the idea has been for a while, Donald Trump won, look at how racist and terrible and knuckle-dragging we are as a country, where I think it spoke to a lot of different issues. Maybe that was an element of it. I can't break that down. I'm sure there are numbers on it, but it strikes me that we are a fairly sensible people that said, you know what, that's too. I haven't talked to a Democrat, a liberal, a mainstream person that's not, out protesting in the street, that doesn't think that, we went too far with the border under Biden. It's really just almost a universal view.
It's common sense.
It's common sense, right? And it's not a restrictionist thing. It's just not a totally open policy. But doesn't that give you some policy?
It does.
We're in a good place.
It does. And I guess what I'd say is
You love the Iran war, and nobody in America does.
My negativity is about the fact that our politics and our kind of our power in this country, whether it's political or otherwise, has gotten increasingly untethered from that common sense. Because, what drove me nuts in government was the 65% ideas that just you couldn't do. In the same way, I'm sure that the Democrats would block Republicans. So I'm not saying I think the Republicans are guiltier. But we don't have to even agree on that. What's crazy is that we have a system that prevents the common sense solutions from being implemented because of a mixture of money, performance, ideology, blood sport. The
individuals and
polarization that is
Donald Trump.
Algorithmically driven individuals like Donald Trump, because I think there is, if you look back at the sweep of American history, I just had to do, Franklin says at the beginning of the first speech in my book is Ben Franklin, And it's a fascinating speech because it's a closing argument at the Constitutional Convention. Right? They're like, Franklin's the oldest guy. He's the most accomplished guy here. He gets to write the speech. And he doesn't say a word about the Constitution. The entire speech is about the virtue of compromise. And he says, when you get everybody together in a room, essentially, you bring not only their skills and their talents, you bring all their prejudices, all their selfish interests, the good and bad of everybody's in the room together. And so nobody should win. Like, we should compromise and from that basis move forward, right? And that's how we got a country to begin with, because we're not all going to agree. And if you look at the sweep of history, we go through tumultuous arguments, and we usually kind of come out on some equilibrium that makes sense before we enter another cycle of tumultuous argument. Right now, we're in a cycle of tumultuous argument.
Are you part of that?
Yeah, I am. But because
do you feel bad about that in any sense? I mean, I read a lot of stuff about, the fascist government, the authoritarians, the racists, et cetera. I mean, is there a place for you to pull back from that in a way that, it's a tumultuous argument, and I'm part of that?
I think that, look, I feel like you cannot use and this is just my view, what we've just been talking about, which is the fundamental decency of most people and the common sense instincts of most people, cannot be a shield against calling out what ICE is doing in this country, or what Trump is doing in Iran, or whatever the thing is. I do think this is an authoritarian government, and so now where I think where the onus I take away from this conversation that's important is I feel like it's important to call that out, and I think it's important to protect or try to protect people that are vulnerable in this kind of moment. At the same time, it does put more onus on people like me who are doing that to try to engage with people who I don't agree with.
Thank you for coming.
Who are not because it puts the onus on me, and where I probably make mistakes is all if I leave people with the impression that all Republicans are fascist authoritarians or because actually my personal experience is not just with individual people, but even with politicians, I tend to get along with Republicans who I know in Congress and or retired from. Actually, most of them have left Congress because they didn't like where it was going. But I think we have to kind of go a bit of an extra mile to actually, it's another reason why I also try to engage regularly with people in the private sector too, because you can paint a monolithic picture of them, and too, in the same way, by the way, that I don't like it when people say that the left is all the craziest online post about Latinx, trans, whatever. We have to stop typecasting whole groups of people. However, I do think though there is extreme behavior taking place right now, and that needs to be separated out and in my mind called out. Because the other thing I noticed in writing this book is that I was like, what's unique about Trump? And this was actually an important exercise. There's nothing unique about his populism. Like the populist speech I have in here is about the white working class and their grievances against elites and establishment. And it was this weird mix of Bernie Sanders socialism and Donald Trump kind of, white working class politics. America First, I have a chapter that has a big piece on that and kind of this kind of paranoid isolationism or sensible isolationism, however you want to frame it. Anti-immigration sentiment has ebbed and flowed. And, so there's a lot of currents that lead into Trump that are totally organic to America. I may disagree with them, but they're totally a part of who we are. The one thing that kind of separates Trump that is interesting is that in the past, it was interesting, even Alexander Stevens, like the vice president of the Confederacy, who gave a speech literally defending white supremacy and slavery as the basis of the Confederacy. Well, they went through a legal process of having referendums to succeed, and then they wrote a constitution. The speech he gave was defending the merits of their constitution, the kind of legal framework. People played within certain rules. Like even if I disagreed with them, even in the civil rights movement, the people on the other side were enforcing laws. There's a kind of the extrajudicial quality of Trump.
He doesn't give a fuck.
Yeah, the degree to which I don't give a shit if this war is illegal or if it's if my family's making billions of dollars because I'm shaking down countries for crypto investments. Like there's something he separates himself from. If this is all one big competition and debate that we're all having, and where he gets dangerous to me is when he kind of steps out of it. And even like the ICE stuff, it's like we don't need to tell people why they're being rounded up and thrown in an internment camp. Like they just can do it. Like that. When I see stuff like that, is when I'm like, whoa, wait a second. That's the authoritarian stuff.
Mm-hmm. There's one. This might be something to close on. Not to cut this too short, but Ben Franklin, which you open the book with, he and you highlight this. Says, as the oldest, wisest and most kind of popular American that there was at the time, he plays on that and says, like, look, the older I get, the less sure of myself that I am. Young people have this absolute sureness of where they are. They're always right about everything. Did you have any reflections? Well, you've been young in politics forever. That's like
I did. I love that line. The older I get, the more likely I am to doubt my views. And because I've been on like quite a journey. I started out. All right, I mean, just if you want to do the whole journey, I was like a right-wing Republican in high school.
Oh, dear.
Because I grew up on the Upper West Side, and I was kind of rebelling against my environment. The first politician I worked for was the 1997 re-election campaign of Rudy Giuliani. And then I changed and became essentially a left-of-center Democrat.
What was her name?
Actually, I went to college in Texas, and so then I think I rebelled against, being in Texas. I went to Rice, but then I kind of settled into who I was. I think in my 20s, and I went to work for Obama. Yeah, he was like probably more progressive than Hillary, but he's red states, blue states. It was a message of national unity, and the reality I got mugged by, to paraphrase the liberals getting mugged by reality become neocons, which I think no longer holds entirely. I kind of got mugged by, the polarization. I was surprised as a 31-year-old entering the White House at the intensity of the opposition to Obama from the kind of Mitch McConnells of the world. I was like, well, these people won't work with us on anything, And then the kind of racialized subtext of some of the Tea Party, right? And then all the way to Trump, and so I became more partisan, and in some ways more progressive, because it felt like core beliefs I had were under assault. But to go to Franklin, the two things I've tried to do are change my mind, even when I'm moving to the left, which you guys might know, I being willing to change assumptions and change mine, and also do something which I should do more of. I have a tendency to speak with and I think it comes from having been a spokesperson. I don't have the answers. I think we all have to say sometimes, I don't have all the answers. I'm sure I'm wrong about a bunch of stuff I said today. I'm working this out like we all are. And that's what is wonderful about a democracy, though, is we can work all this out in public.
What percentage of stuff do you think you were wrong about today?
Wherever I disagree.
Because we're going to have AI give us a number on that. Yeah.
But I think we all have to start acknowledging that. There's a kind of stridency that creeps into all of us in this day and age, and online,
Of course.
Yes. Because a clip or a post doesn't lend itself to any complexity. So I
think you say something really dumb for us so we get a really great
I think that we, but boy, what I've noticed, guys? I don't know if you noticed when you travel, so I started trying to say publicly every time and I did it too late here today, but whenever I speak in front of an audience, I say what I just said. I don't know all the answers. I'm sure I'm wrong about stuff. People audibly react positively.
Yeah.
I think people want they don't want you to show up and I know everything, and they want people willing to say, like, part of counter programming. What has happened with Trump is, I think, getting back to political storytelling and speeches, like, but part of it is also just like, and this is a criticism of some on the left too, is just saying, like, none of us have all the answers.
And it's a problem in politics too, because people on the populist left and right, I would just say on the left and right, hate experts. That's always been a thing, whether it's, the best and the brightest in Vietnam being, I know you wrote something recently about McNamara. Best and the brightest in Vietnam. It's COVID policy. If it's, people on the left and the right about, economists have pretty similar views on tariffs, but they don't give a shit about this because the experts are the problem so many of the times. But that also has a negative problem built into it, right? Of not trusting certain experts at certain times.
And I wanted to say this because you make an important point. Being selective in your evidence.
Yes.
So the Hungary example you give is an important one, and I want to acknowledge something. Like I was writing about the backlash to globalization, right? And I was talking about the combination of the kind of homogenization of culture, but also the kind of multinational corporatization of work that washed over Hungary. That is half the backlash, roughly, whatever. The other half, though, is immigration and people who look different and worship different. And maybe I don't want to oversimplify. Well, I am going to oversimplify for the purposes of saying some people will look at a problem and it's like, let's say I need the populist globalization critique. And if you're on the left, you're just going to look at, certain parts of capitalism, but you're not going to pay any attention to immigration. And, where if you're on the right, you might look at just at immigration, right? And you're not seeing the whole picture. Like, we choose just whatever information reinforces our own instinct and worldview.
And when those worldviews change, I mean, we've mentioned many times in the show, and I think I even talked to him about it many years ago, Bernie Sanders used to be very restrictionist on immigration for suppressing working class wages, his argument. The political winds changed, people on the left. He doesn't talk about that very much anymore. So I think he's selective in his presentation of what I think he truly believes, which is probably a more restrictionist immigration policy, which he was not saying during the Biden administration, right?
Yeah. That's right. And maybe because when he ran for president in 2016, he felt like if he wanted to run again, he had to. And I think people are ready to have people tell them their version of the truth. Like, this is, you're not gonna like everything I say. This is what I believe. This is what I think is going on. This is how I think we need to get out of this. And I'm going to try to convince you that we can do it. I'm going to invite you to be a part of it instead of shaming you or, attack. Like, if the left's tactic is shame, Trump's tactic is, dehumanization, demonization. Like, strip that out. Let's have actually a serious conversation about, because I do worry about this national identity question, because the monoculture is gone, except for we started with the Knicks. Like, sports is probably it. That's not good. Like, we need some things that we can all feel similar and good about, and that should be kind of our national symbols, including. I don't think people have to like the government, but a sense that the political system itself is good. I think now people are losing faith in that itself, and that's.
But your unifying thing is hating billionaires, right?
Yes. I was saving that for the end. Every billionaire is a policy failure, my friend. Yeah. We shouldn't just dislike their wealth. We should hate them personally. There's my dumb clip that you can
and
take
expropriate their wealth.
Right? And give them to my friends.
Collectivize the farms and
Ben Rhodes.
Ben Rhodes, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate you.
Wait, did we go the entire time without mentioning Israel?
We did.
Yes.
We did.
Holy fuck.
Yeah.
No.
That wasn't on purpose.
Bye.
Bye.
We know of new methods of attack. The Trojan horse, the fifth column, the fifth column.
All right, people, you know we love ground news. Ich liebe ground news, because they do it in foreign languages, which we just discovered, or I discovered
you did?
today.
Doing
But we don't endorse products that we don't like, so no Fugazi pills and such. We use ground news. Matt, you used it today. What did you come up with?
So you just spin. It's like an Elvis Costello concert. You spin the wheel and you say, "Okay, here's a headline," and then let's see if they have funny, different versions of the same story and another headline. So this headline: Trump declares himself. This is the sort of the standard description. Trump declares himself in perfect health after a physical exam.
Good.
Like, okay,
great.
This is going to be fun. What these headlines are. So HuffPost: Trump's third annual checkup, scare quotes for no reason, in 13 months leaves mental health questions unaddressed.
Oh, it didn't address those. But by the way, you know what ground news is also great for? I just discovered that HuffPost still exists. Continue.
Whereas the Hindustan Times,
Great newspaper.
everything checked out perfectly. Trump shares health update after annual exam.
Is that in quotes, by the way, or
Yes.
is that just the
Yes.
Okay.
And raw story: major red flag at Trump medical visit suggests it was far from routine. Onlooker. Onlooker.
Who was
some dude on the
some
street?
guy was walking by?
Haven't.
What was the? Do you know the red flag? Is it in the story description?
Let's see.
That he's old and
Onlookers
clearly
weren't so
insane?
sure. Top of the concerns was length of time the president spent at the medical facility. A duration some said did not suggest ...
Wow, that is stupid.
That is very
Yeah.
bad. And I'll leave one more just because the words are funny. This is from Forbes. Trump says his physical went perfectly, all caps, amid speculation over bruised hands and swollen legs.
Yeah. Yeah. He does have a lot of bruised hands. Did you notice that?
It's getting weird.
Well, Ground News has a whole. Do they have a bruised hands vertical?
Meter. They should have a
We
meter.
give a
They
meter
probably should.
of
It just
how
gets darker,
purple the hands
more
are today.
like a banana.
All right, go to groundnews.com/fifth to get 40% off the unlimited, not limited at all. Buy anything. Only your own
Vantage
curiosity. But the
plan.
unlimited access,
Access
I was just adding color in that. Good Lord, it's the unlimited access Vantage plan. But I'm just saying it's not limited.
Where do you go to get that, Kmele?
That's groundnews.com/fifth. Just, again, great value, great deal. You should probably try Ground News.
40% off.
Boom.